Hey y'all, I hope everybody is doing fabulous today. So we are drawing one of my absolute favorite characters. It's Barbara from Genshin Impact. She is the most adorable little healer from Genshin Impact. She's a water hydro user. She's also a part of the church and a choir. She's very, very popular in the Genshin world of Mondstadt as the singer, and everybody wants to get to know her, and like overall the cuteness is just perfect. So she has been my healer since like day one of Genshin, because I think it was like a one of those banner things that if you did the test and whatnot of certain characters, or it was something or another, but I ended up getting Barbara, how much I do know. But Barbara's the absolute cuteness. So I ended up drawing her because it's her birthday. She's a July the 5th baby, so who knew? But yes, needless to say, as I mentioned before, this month is going to have a load of Genshin characters, so there's not going to be for a lack of content for any of it. So I will say what I am thinking, because I really like how the sketch turned out. I think on Sunday I will actually post the probably 30 minutes of the sketch session, because I really liked it, and overall I just really like this piece. I feel like everything's finally coming together. It's getting there. And I've got a comparison at the end, because I just realized that I drew Barbara. It was about 2 months ago, almost to this day, 2 months ago. So to be able to see the comparison of a growth and a change and a development from that point in time, and understanding my style and how I like to draw and what I want to bring out. So I really like Genshin. I love their design. And oddly enough, whenever I was doing this drawing, I said I ended up making Barbara. She looks a little bit more grown up, so I guess for her birthday she's growing up. But yes, it was a fun thing. I really enjoyed focusing on the details, the smaller details of this drawing, mainly working on that book detail and just her sleeves and her outfit, trying to make things a little bit more flowy. It's something that I definitely need to practice a lot more on. And oddly enough, this drawing, it took me a good 5 hours to complete, but it was mainly because I kept getting distracted and doing something and coming back to it, and I'm terrible at that. I've got a bad habit of doing that. I prolonged doing her drawing the day before, and I was working on some character designs for my little OCs I have, and my intro and outro. So I'm trying to revamp some things to make it more, how can I say it, not really stylized, but to make them more cartoony in a sense. I've been watching a lot of the, what is it called? Not Hotel, yeah, it was Hotel Has Been. I saw their designs, and I really liked how they portrayed the 2D character aspect. As I mentioned before, I really love 2D, but I also end up rendering a majority of the time, making it more 3D. So I wanted to focus on how to do certain styles. But yes, I've got two main styles that I like to do. I love doing the 2D, and I love doing the anime / realistic, like semi-realistic style, because I have never been able to confidently do the invisible nose or like some invisible features that's on these characters. It's the anime style. I really have not been the best at doing that. So I ended up doing almost a pretty similar background to what my other drawing was of Barbara, and I got more of the trees in the background, some foliage. I do end up blurring it some, so it's not 100% in focus, because I really wanted Barbara to be the main focus. And let's see here, I had issues too on lighting, because that's another study I need to do, is figure out how best to do the lighting situation and scenario, and be able to really focus on the lighting coming from behind more so than in the front. Apparently I must really love doing that and putting it behind and having it come everywhere. But yes, in this video I actually used some brushes that I hadn't used in a while. It's from the creator Sam Yang from Sam Does Art. As I mentioned before, I do subscribe to Patreons and learning tools and trying to figure out how best to do things. So I did use his round brush, and then I used his foliage brush for the trees in the background. And honestly, if I would have probably done more detail with that, it would have been more in focus. but a majority of the time I do stick back to the simple round paint and brush, and then of course I use the render brush from JingSketch. I've been trying to play around with some ideas of how best to do certain brushes and figuring out how best I want to do line art, and I think that's one of the biggest things is how I want the line art to be. Needless to say, I do end up going over the line art, and then towards the end what I end up doing is I put some line art in some certain spots because I feel like the hair kind of lost some focus and details, and so I felt going back over at the end with some line art and then kind of, I don't know, not putting it as stark black as this was. So it was actually like a blue black, but I ended up going over it and then changing it to multiply and trying to do it somewhat closer to the color of the hair or of the skin, just to help to bring out some definition. So I think what took me the longest time, especially doing the second round of sketching on this, was I was trying to make sure my lines made sense, because at first I thought I wanted to use it as a reference layer. That's one wonderful thing about Procreate, is if you do line art and you really like your line art, you can do a reference layer, and then whatever you color put and choose up underneath, it ends up going to where that reference layer is. I'll have to probably do a video explaining that one day once I learn best how to do the line art. But I'm trying to figure out if I want my lines to look more like a colored pencil kind of feel, or if I like this solid line. A lot of times I end up liking doing more of the solid lines, and I think I used, it was a thin liner brush. I can't remember what it was from. So the thin liner brush I actually used in this one for the outlines was from Lotus Bubbles brush pack, which, as I mentioned before, subscribe to the Patreons to learn it, especially these amazing artists, and learning more about how best to do my art. Because sometimes, even though there is the script brush, I think it's called, in Procreate, I don't know how best to mess with these settings, and once I find another brush that actually does what I want it to do, I end up mainly just using that brush. But yes, so needless to say, if you subscribe to some of these artist Patreons, they do have some brushes or even some color palettes if that's what you really want to use. And I will say I'm very proud of myself being able to recently look at colors and figure out, okay, is this going to be more purple blue, or is this more of a red blue? I mean, is it cooler tones, warm tones? How exactly do I want to bring out a piece? So I ended up doing more, I think, the bluer tones, the cooler tones for this drawing, because I end up using the background lighting, which actually with the sky being blue and with it being bright, things will have a more blue purple cast. So I ended up doing that towards the middle of this drawing. And as I mentioned before, I do, my steps of drawing is base sketch, and then I do a better sketch on top, and if I like that one then I move along, but if not, do another sketch on top of that, and then I end up doing down the base colors, which is what we're doing now. I do a little bit of rendering here and there just to help me figure out how exactly I wanted to put the coloring, but generally I end up doing a rendering, I think about halfway into the video. Yes, actually I think we're still kind of working on some base colors. So I ended up putting my line art layer on a multiply layer, but before changing it to multiply, I ended up doing a hue and saturation change to make it more cohesive to what the coloring of the skin was going to be. And what I ended up doing, you notice I pulled up the color harmony color wheel on the little color selection tool, however you want to say it. My reasoning is because I was having issues figuring out what color hue to do the shading with. There's multiple varieties and how best to do things, but sometimes I find it a lot easier to just take that color wheel and change it to the, let me make sure I'm pronouncing it. Yeah, the harmony. And then it's got the option in the corner to do either triadic or complementary colors, or it's even got, what is it? Tetradic and triadic and analogous, split complementary and complementary. So it does help if you don't know what colors best complement the other and how best to understand the color wheel. If you have a base color and you're able to figure out, okay, I want this to shading, or I want a contrasting color that is complementary to this color, it's so easy to be able to select your color, go on the color wheel, and then it shows you what the complementary color to that shade or hue or color or value would be. And then of course you can make adjustments as needed. As long as you're in the general wheelhouse, it does help out. Let's see here. As I mentioned before, I've really been embracing the Disney aspects and the curvatures and the semi-realistic style, realistic style, 2D. I'm not quite as all over the place as I used to be. I will say that much. I'm not quite all over. But I hope everybody's gaming adventures are going fabulous. And if you have Barbara, what team do you use Barbara in? Which I say if, I mean generally just about everybody should at this point. But yes, I ended up, whenever I was drawing this towards the end, I was like, I ended up making Barbara have more of like a Barbie characteristic. But then again, I was thinking, well, I kind of wanted to do the more Disney-esque style. So it worked out. And I had one issue, I will say, throughout the drawing, or really you'll notice it probably more so to the end whenever I do the liquify tool, is the head angle. But I'm notorious for wanting to choose all these weird angles, and I try. I see a challenge and I try to just go for it, because I'm like, I'm not gonna let this challenge defeat me, I'm gonna win. But I end up making her head a little bit smaller and then pushing it back, because I used a reference photo from the game where she does her burst and her head's kind of tilted away, so it kind of elongates the neck the way it looks, and it foreshortens certain things and it pushes other objects. It's a lot of angle perspective. I'm still learning how best to do that. So with the background part, I ended up adding the, what are these called? I'm very disappointed in myself. I used to play piano, but anyways, the lines that the music notes go on for Barbara. So what I ended up doing, I got the light pen, which is in the luminescent tab on Procreate. So it's already a pen that's available for use in Procreate, which is great. And then just went through and chose a very saturated color for the outside line, and then I used that throughout. And then I ended up doing I think it was add layer for the one that's in the front, so it's more like wow. And then all I did was I took on this part just a plain round brush, and I went through, and depending on how hard you press depends on the opacity of it, so I would lightly press and press hard, and then I went back and I put the alpha lock layer on it, and I just added some colors to them to try to bring in some variation. And then, as we know, I love my chromatic aberration. Sometimes probably a little bit too much, but I do love the tool, especially whenever you're trying to make bubbles and try to do it as simple as possible. So what I ended up doing was taking the chromatic aberration after I got all my colors halfway set, and then I ended up doing that, I can't remember to what percentage, I may have it visible on here. And then once I do that, I have it on, I think, an add layer, and then I do a little Gaussian blur, and it does help out. It does bring some things, because honestly, I halfway contemplated doing the little stars, but I kind of liked the more bubble effect. I've been really liking bubbles, and like, what's it called, the bokeh effect. I do like that one as well. And also there's a brush in Procreate, I think it's in the luminance tab. Let's see, luminance, yeah, it's actually called bokeh light. So there is a brush that if you didn't want to do individual bubbles like this and do adjustments, there is the bokeh lights brush, but I will forewarn, like, it puts a lot of them on there at once, so that's another brush that you'd really have to play with the settings and whatnot if you didn't want them all to be like so clustered. I hope that makes sense. I hope all this is making sense. I try to, as I mentioned before, I try to share what I have learned and what I've come across, what works best for me. And of course, I mainly just use the Procreate app. I do have Clip Studio Paint, and I actually do have a big drawing tablet for on the desktop, and I've contemplated doing some videos using that. But yes, I'm having some storage issues on my computer. I need to figure out how best to like put more storage. I'm having storage issues everywhere, the iPad or the computer. The computer mainly because I've got both Honkai Star Rail and Genshin on there, And I really wanted to do Withering Waves, but then it was like, oh, you don't have enough storage. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I don't need to go on another gaming adventure at this moment then. So one day I will upgrade the storage. I don't know. I'm sure there's videos out there. That's one wonderful thing about having YouTube and social media platforms and things like that. People are able to find things that help them on anything from putting more storage on something or learning how to draw in a drawing app. But yes. I hope I'm not rambling too much. So what I ended up doing was I did a add layer and a multiply layer, and I kind of just haphazardly but with a purpose went through putting down some lights and some colors here and there, because I end up using that for my color selection for rendering. As I mentioned before, sometimes it's kind of hard to get a certain saturation of a color that you're really wanting, because it may not be the color that you're thinking it is. Like a yellow is not necessarily a yellow. It could be more of an orange hue or a blue hue even. And so whenever I took of course it looks very blown out right now, but whenever I took that, I went through and put where I wanted the main focus to be at, and then I was able to go back and color select and refine and smooth things out, because the brush that I was using, it does have a little texture, so if you zoom in like really close, then you see all this texture. But if you're one of those that don't care about having texture or not, then that's fine. But I do notice sometimes it causes some issues. So right here you'll notice a little hair. That's another thing I've got to practice more on. The hair spirals, like I said, the hair angle is kind of weird too. But I ended up doing that multiply on that part, and then I found out that it was kind of blendy, so that's why at the end I ended up doing the thin liner brush with going over it to show, hey, this is split from this is split from this. But yes. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's any major like updates or changes or anything that I've done recently, but I can't think of anything new happening. Other than just, as I mentioned before, just doing the game and adventures, learning more about these characters and figuring out how best to draw them. To bring my style out into the world. Let's see here. So I really like how I did her eyes. I had an issue with the angle, to say the least. As I mentioned before, it's a very unusual angle, and the eyes end up changing shape a tiny bit. It's not like your usual like straight on eye shape. That's one thing I will say I've had. I think that's why too I really wanted to focus more on some studies of Disney styles and the cartooning effect, because it really does help with the eye shape, because then you start to look and try to figure out, okay, how best an eye could be just a plain circle, and to be able to squish it and change the shape to show emotions and some effects. It really does help. Needless to say, not my drawings won't all have that effect or anything, but it does help to do these studies and to figure out how best to bring certain emotions or even an angle. It does help, because then you think also too about the bone structure, how exactly the bone structure is supposed to be, and art is just an ever-learning experience. I'm just constantly learning, constantly trying to evolve and improve everything, and generally I think this style is the style that I like the most to draw in, because without knowing it, a lot of characters end up in this kind of style, and of course the rendering as well. So it's just refining things here and there. I took the longest, I think, with the hair and the book. I really like how the book turned out. I love rendering objects, I found out, especially the metal objects, and that's just, I don't know, it's just a perspective, and then you look at things and you're like, oh, it's finally coming together. So it's really good experience. Let's see here. So of course, still in the rendering, as I mentioned before, that book, I render it for the longest time. And I take like quite a few different breaks throughout the day whenever I was working on this, so I think that's why it took me so long to finish and to complete. I actually edited the video yesterday, and it was a little bit later. I was like, oh, I think I'm just gonna go to bed and do the voiceover the next day. So here we are on the next day doing the voiceover. I really like how, so you'll notice in the beginning sketch I had another book up at the corner, like right above her hand, but then I was like, I felt like that was too much in one spot, and that's not where I wanted the focus to be at, and I really didn't want to render 2 books. And needless to say, the other book wouldn't have been as bad because it's a smaller space, but then I looked and it's like some people use one of the books as her weapon, others use the like the not the globe, it's Kokomi's weapon, but some people use that or other weapons as well, and I'm like, there's not really one specific weapon that is like, oh, this is 100% just Barbara's weapon. Like some of these characters, like Al Haytham has a weapon that's like specifically designed for him, and a lot of the 5 stars they have a specific weapon, and so that's why I decided to just get rid of it out of the corner. So now we're just working on the refining of the sketch and the drawing, and I ended up taking a overlay layer as well, and I felt like some of the coloring was not as saturated as what I wanted it to be, and then the hue and saturation tab, it just was not as effective for me whenever I was trying to do it. So I ended up doing an overlay layer, and I think I selected a more orange color, if I'm not mistaken. And this is where I was like, okay, so part of the under chin would be visible, so there would be shading there. And I think because whenever I drew over my lines, that it just didn't help with the definition. And then I was having issues with the looking at, I was like, something still was off, and then I figured out, I think it was the mouth. I should have made it a little bit wider, so I ended up using the liquify tool, messing with that a bit, and then I'd go back over the main sketch of it all. Because like, as I mentioned before, the head angle's kind of weird, so she's like looking off on the side. Yeah, that's just one thing that I'm doing. So you'll see I've got a lot of add normal. So I go back and forth. So I end up looking at my under sketch and seeing if it looks good and going back to it. So needless to say, I did not render the little, what's it, like a, it's not a belt, it's like a buckle on her dress, because a lot of it really isn't as visible up under certain parts. So you'll see this textured part. As I was working on, I was like, oh, it's a little bit too textured. I didn't want it to be that textured, so I go back over with a more solid brush. And I've been trying to do better about having a light touch when drawing instead of being so heavy-handed. So this is where I went back over with the lining, and the first part I looked at was the way the chin looked. I was like, okay, this makes it look a little bit better. It puts it back in my mind of how best it's supposed to look. Yeah, I felt like it, or at least to me personally, I felt like it helped it and helped to convey the angle of everything better, and it's not so blendy. But yes. The nose did give me some issue, but not as much issue as what it normally would give me, so I feel like I'm getting better on that aspect. But I ended up using, as I mentioned before, the thin liner brush, and to do her little ringlets to help show direction, because you see right through here, it kind of loses some of its definition with the shading, and it just, I felt like that just helped better. And I'll alpha locked that layer and then put it on a multiply and went back over it just to make sure that the colors are not too like in your face in a way. I hope that makes sense. But yes, I still wanted it to kind of blend in, but still to have the slight difference in showing it. So I ended up doing also on the book, I was like, oh, I can't forget to have an add layer on top of this, because this would be a little reflective for sure. But yes, I think we're getting pretty close to the end of this video. I hope everybody really likes these. I do like making them. As I mentioned before, it kind of holds me pretty accountable to do drawings and to bring out content and to see what I can do different for the future. Process videos are just so fun to watch. Or maybe that's just me. I do have a Patreon, and I'm halfway contemplating as well to just upload on the Patreon like the full time lapse or the full drawing from start to finish, instead of just doing these little short videos and posting the long ones on there. Alrighty, so here we are in our time-lapse replay section. So, as I mentioned before, I hope everybody's doing well, everybody's having fun in their gaming adventures, and you're staying safe in this crazy world that we live in today. Hope all your pools are going the way they need to go. Currently it's Siegewind on that banner, and I'm still trying to get her. She has yet to come home. I have gotten Tignari and Diluc on the other banner, and I'm like, okay, I don't need anybody else but Siegewind right now. And if I don't get her, which I really, really hope I do, I will hold out for the Perfumer in the next, not next update, but the one after that, the second phase of it. But yes, so I will insert the official time lapse and art comparison at the end. And until next time, bye-bye!